Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, the anti-Olivia. In the same way that the Antichrist is the Antichrist.
Yeah, I believe in all the opposite values.
One of us only lies, and one of us only tells the truth.
Anyway.
And in this episode, we are all getting ready to embrace the apocalypse. That's right. It's the end of the world, baby. And I feel hungover and slightly ill.
How are you still hungover?
We had...
No, don't say it.
A number of drinks.
We had our first ever experience of buzz balls.
Yeah.
Something that has an artifact that has been sort of littering the sacred halls of the Central Line for as long as I've lived in London. Is powerful stuff. That is a potion.
Oh god. It really is the end of days.
I feel great.
Oh.
The feast is o'er. Now brimming wine in lordly cup is seen to shine before each eager guest. And silence fills the crowded hall, as deep as when the herald's call thrills in the loyal breast.
We've all heard of Y2K, but what about 12K? I mean, why 1K?
Well done.
Why 1K?
Yes, that's right. In this episode, we're going to be asking the question, why 1K? As in, did medieval people really think the world was going to end in the year 1000?
Did people think the year was going to end in 1000?
Well, I guess they were right.
Yeah.
It did, as far as we know.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, we're going to be going back to really the origins of Christian apocalyptic thinking, by which I mean we're going to be talking about Judaism. We're going to be talking about why the idea of an apocalypse could be appealing to Jews and Christians in the first century. Then we're going to be talking about how the idea of the apocalypse was sort of used and abused over the course of the Middle Ages by various peoples in various kind of times of strife. And we're also going to be talking about all the weird shit that's in the medieval Christian apocalypse. We're going to be talking about the dragon that has the wrong number of horns for its number of heads. We're going to be talking about the beast from the sea beast.
The sea beast, the CBB beast, and the land beast. Sorry, I'm still hung up on the idea of like a New Year's Eve truther. Like, they want you to think the world ends on December 31st, but it doesn't. It just keeps going. It's all a scam to sell more calendars.
It's a scam by Big Calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure that Joe has literally made that exact joke. It's the sort of thing he'd say.
It is, isn't it? Even when he's not here, he's here, huh? His spirit lives in us.
I see him in my dreams.
Sing to me, Joe, and through me speak of the apocalypse.
Anyway, so let's start with Jews.
Yes, so all of our different religious traditions about what the apocalypse is, how it will function, and the kind of purpose it will serve, it can all be traced back to Jewish theology. And so we're going to talk about a little bit about Jewish eschatology, eschatology being a beautiful word that is used specifically for how people perceive the apocalypse. And one of the most important things that you have to understand about Jewish eschatology is that it is by and large the eschatology and the worldview of a people in exile. Mm-hmm. Because most of it is drawn from books of the Jewish Bible, of the Tanakh, as it's called, that were written in around the 7th century BC when Jewish people were exiled from the Levant in Babylonia. And so it is a story of exile, it is a story written from exile, and it's a story of homecoming. It's a story of the Jewish people being restored to Jerusalem and to the land of Israel, not just temporarily, but also spiritually and eternally. And so it involves God returning the Jewish people to Israel, restoring the house of David to rulership over the Jewish people, and appointing a Messiah from the house of David to lead the Jewish people and the world in a new age of justice and peace, where all Gentile nations gather together and they all accept the Jewish God. All of the dead are resurrected. All of the souls are judged. Some people are sent away to be purified. Those who are judged to be found wanting. No one goes to hell, crucially.
They get sent to therapy.
They get sent to spiritual therapy, which, to be fair, a lot of us could probably use. And there is a new era of heaven and a new earth. And it is perfect and it is eternal.
And what's interesting, I think, about that is that we'll get into the Christian worldview, and of course we'll talk a little bit about the Islamic kind of idea of how the world will end, because they're very, very, very similar. But one of the things I want to point out up top is that there is nothing inevitable about end-of-world narratives in religion. There's nothing inherent about that to sort of the concept of gods or religion or anything. So the Greeks and the ancient sort of Greco-Roman gods, there's no apocalypse narrative. Hinduism has a kind of end-of-world thing, but it's not a, and then there was happily ever after end of the story. It's more of a cycle of rebirth. Buddhism has a similar, cyclical kind of narrative. Norse mythology is complicated because it is kind of cyclical, but also, and I think we'll get into this when we talk about the Christian apocalypse narrative, we cannot really trust the version of Ragnarok that is handed down to us from Christian writers, because they are Christian writers, not pagan writers. The only contemporaneous sort of major religion that I can think of that has an end of world narrative that's similar to the Jewish one, again before Christianity shows up, is Zoroastrianism, which is at this point is the state religion of Persia, and that's also a story about the final and eternal triumph of good over evil and the sort of redemption of humanity. So it's a very particular thing.
And it's not inevitable that this would come to be a Jewish belief either, because this is, these prophecies, this eschatology, which is directly framed as the prophecies of someone, the prophet Ezekiel, and several other prophets who have been given these visions while in exile after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So it can very much be interpreted as a way of coping with this cataclysmic event. And even then, amongst different Jewish populations and schools of thought, there were very differing beliefs. So what we have is the beliefs of the Pharisees, from whom most modern Jewish theology evolved, but there were also other schools of Jewish thought that didn't even believe in an immortal soul. So, again, this is one strain of thinking that is the product of a very specific and quite traumatic set of circumstances. And it is also the single biggest influence on the way that Christians viewed the fate of the world and the apocalypse.
Absolutely. So, it's very important to remember that early Christianity can be understood as a kind of weird Jewish sect. In the first century, which is already a very weird period for Judaism as a whole, because Rome sweeps in, the Second Temple gets destroyed, and all Jewish people are like, well, what the fuck do we do now? And, some people glom onto the teachings of this guy from Nazareth, who, claims to be who arrives, claims to be the Messiah, but crucially, none of this happens.
This guy from the boonies, this guy from the ends. Yeah.
This is the kind of the evolution that Christians add on is, well, the Messiah shows up as a human man, water into wine, feed the 5,000, crucifixion, comes back, say, look at this sick hole in my hand, anyway, peace out, I'll be back later. And Christians are left kind of wondering what the fuck to make of all of this. And they are wondering what the fuck to make of all of this in a context of increasingly severe persecution. The Roman, as I'm sure you probably know, the Roman Empire in the sort of early centuries of Christianity has no truck for Christianity, is increasingly hostile. It sees it as a threat. It's this weird cult that's kind of spreading among the slaves and the women.
Yeah.
And basically, well, no, it is, because early Christianity is very ideologically very radical idea of, like, actually maybe everybody's souls do have merit.
Yes.
And it's very important to remember that, it is very popular initially amongst the meek of Roman society, and that's a very destabilizing thing. First shall be last, etc., etc. And it's in the context of this persecution that we get the single foundational text for the Christian idea of how the world will end. Because again, Christianity has inherited the Hebrew Bible, or a version of the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Old Testament, which they call the Old Testament. And then they add this second layer, which is the Book of Revelation. So the Book of Revelation, it is a canonical part of the Christian Bible.
It's the final book in the New Testament.
It is often attributed to the Apostle John, which I think, impartial scholarship would say, no, it's not. It's this other guy called John of Patmos.
We don't really know that much about John of Patmos. He is the self-identified author of the Book of Revelation. But we really don't know much about him, except that he identifies himself as John and says that he is writing from the Greek island of Patmos. It's believed that Revelation is written in the late 1st century AD. He does not explicitly identify himself with John the Apostle.
No, that comes later.
Yes. And so we really don't know much about who he is on a personal level. The best that we can do is try to analyze the position that he's writing from.
Mm-hmm. And the position that he's writing from is the position of an exile.
Yes, so once again we're returning to this exile narrative, because it's believed that this is written during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian, who is quite famous for especially brutal crackdowns and exiles of Christians. And so, again, that's basically all that we know, but we see these similar themes of exile and restoration of the righteous to the homeland that they deserve from the Jewish eschatology echoed in Revelation. And I should say as well, it's called Revelation, this book, from the first word of the text, which is the word apocalypse. So that's also where the word apocalypse comes from. It doesn't specifically mean the end of the world. Apocalypsis is the Greek word for revelation, and that is how this book starts. It says approximately in English, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John."
I want to, before we get into a sort of close reading of the Book of Revelation, I want to put a gigantic magnifying glass up to the word soon, because that's a really important piece of context for how we should read the Book of Revelation and how we should think about how early Christians are thinking about and talking about the apocalypse. Which is to say, the assumption of early Christians, by and large, was that the end of days was, if not necessarily imminent, certainly a short-term matter that they were going to have to deal with. Like, there's nothing in the, in the biblical text that when Jesus says, "I'll be back," he means in 3,000 years.
No, not at all.
And there is this assumption that, like, this is something that you need to be aware. Again, there is a literal quote where Jesus says to John, "Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand."
Yes, and there is a real sense of urgency in how this work is written, because it's also quite clear from the text that this was meant to be distributed amongst the churches of Asia, yes, which themselves were being quite harshly oppressed by the Roman Empire. So this is a handbook for the end of days, which you yourself are living through as the reader. So it's pretty drastic stuff.
And it gives very specific conditions for what the end of days is going to look like.
Extremely specific.
Yes. There's a big list. And I will paraphrase because it's quite long. But in the book, John is given this revelation, this vision by God in the form of a lamb, which is Jesus. Very important to remember the lamb is Jesus, because otherwise this is going to be even stranger than it already is. Outlining the very specific sequence of events that will take place leading up to the end of the world. And so this is described as sort of the Lamb opening a series of 7 seals. As in the things that seal things, not the cute animal. And the quick list, I'm going to do the quick list because it
goes on and on. Oh my god, really, it's so specific.
Well, it's also like, I'm going to give the kind of very flippant summary and then maybe dive into a couple of the kind of specifics, but like the visual, it's such a for the Christian Bible, Revelation is such a like vivid and visual and intense like experience to read of like crazy shit is going to happen.
Yes, and I think both the number of events and the things that are described, which we'll get into now, it is all like, it gives you this sense of the horrific, catastrophic proportions of everything that's going to happen. So yeah, please, let's get into it.
Yes, so, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw. And behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. So this is this starts with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which have entered kind of literary canon beyond even their sort of their position in Christian eschatology. So there's the white horse, who is the sort of is given the crown of conquest, and this is the Antichrist, the person who will arrive and sort of be the false prophet, essentially, who will lead people into madness and sin and all that bad stuff. Then we have the Red Rider, who represents war. We have the Black Rider, who represents famine, and the Pale Rider on the pale horse, who represents death. And pale, very specifically, is distinguished from white to give it the connotation of the horse. The pale horse is a dead horse.
I'm sorry, that's reading into it a little bit. We don't know any of that. And this
Other
is the thing
people
is,
have said
none
this.
of these people are really, or these figures really are given much explanation. I mean,
No.
we're not even told this one is war. We're told this is a really evil guy who makes people fight each other on a red horse. And so I think this is part of the mystery for me, is, or part of the interest for me is it's extremely cryptic and extremely mysterious. And this is just one of many of the events that are laid out in the book.
I think it's actually instructive to read one of the other ones, because everybody knows I beheld a pale horse, and his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him, because that is one of the hardest lines in all of Western canon, first of all. But, like, for example, so let's pick the Black Rider, who represents famine. I heard the 3rd beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat upon him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." So it's sort of basically, if we're going to read this as this is famine, he's saying, food is going to be expensive. Anyway, so the 4 horsemen show up. Then there is a great earthquake. The sun and the moon disappear, which would be quite bad.
The sky recedes like a scroll being rolled up.
And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind.
Yeah. I remember someone saying that, like, the King James Bible, I assume this is the King James Bible, is like the most important text in the English language. And I think this goes to show you that it kind of is.
Oh, yeah. No, it's like, I mean...
Shout out King James. Just so interesting to think about, like, this specific translation of the Bible is so influential in shaping this, like, mimetic sort of reproduction of all of these different symbols and signs. So yeah, there's all these extremely sort of dramatic things that are happening. The stars, as we say, fall from the sky.
There's a 7-headed dragon.
Yes, so we see this number 7 repeated over and over again. The 7 trumpets are blown by 7 angels. And there are all these, I mean, I don't even know if we can get into it. There are, like, locusts with human faces. There are all of these different beasts. There's a great beast that appears from the earth and one that appears from the sea.
the Whore of Babylon.
Yes, is there hanging out with the beasts.
Well, the city of Babylon falls as well.
Yes.
And then at the end of this process, there is the Last Judgment, where God will kind of judge the souls of the living and the dead, and basically decide, okay, who's getting into heaven. And after that point, there's a new heaven, and it's even sicker than the old heaven. No, but like, so that's a very, very, very Cliff Notes version of the Book of Revelation. There are these it's this incredibly vivid imagery, this series of sort of, I hate to use the word psychedelic, but there is a kind of psychedelic quality to it. It's very intense. It's very colorful as well, something that you hopefully picked up on. Very, 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 very visual. And I do think, maybe this is because I just read a book about Julian of Norwich and Marguerite Kempe, but like, I do find it really interesting to think about the Book of Revelation as a sort of mediation of an experience that this guy actually had.
Well, because he's in the book.
Yeah.
He's not just saying, I wrote this. He's also saying, like, I was there.
This happened to me.
Yes, and so it also kind of collapses the sense of time and the sense of chronology, because he's saying things like, and then I'm given, a measuring rod to measure people's souls, and he's given a scroll to eat by an angel, and it tastes sweet in his mouth and makes him sick when he swallows it. And so it is very much something that he is interpreting, in a sense, as happening to him, or having happened to him. And you see this in medieval manuscripts as well. He is often drawn in the scenes, or often he's drawn sort of with one foot in the scene and one foot on the margin of the page, as if kind of, to blur the experience of author and character.
Yes, absolutely.
Or participant.
And I do want to, before we move on from Revelation itself, I do want to pick up on the pin that I left in Ragnarok, which is there are lots of specific beats in the story of Ragnarok, which comes to us via Snorri Sturluson and the Icelandic Skaldic tradition, who again are all Christians by the time that they're writing this stuff down. And one of the reasons why we have to kind of treat this, the version of Ragnarok that we are given by Snorri Sturluson, is that there are specific beats that feel familiar. And the tone of the Book of Revelation is very similar to the description of Ragnarok. You have the beast coming out of the sea. You have the moon and the sun disappearing, and the nations of the world descending into war.
Yes, so it's a very destructive, quite violent symbol of what needs to happen philosophically before something better and eternal can come about.
And this is why the context of the persecution of the churches of Asia, and just in general of the Christian community, is such an important context for the Book of Revelation, is that the literal statement of the Book of Revelation is things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And you are going to be presented with opportunities and off-ramps from Christianity. And there will be people who will come to you saying, hey man, there's this cool lady on a horse. Why don't you come hang out with her? And there'll be a guy who claims to be, the true kind of savior. And there'll be all these kind of like forces that are going to kind of try and lead you astray. But if you stay the course, at the end of it, your soul will be elevated and it'll all be worth it.
Yes.
And why would that be a relevant message to members of a persecuted minority sect?
Yes, so it's this grand and intimidating narrative of what is going to happen soon to you as a Christian, and it is meant to be taken very seriously. So how seriously is it taken? Because it's quite a big thing to confront that, at some point soon the sky is going to roll up like a scroll and a dragon is going to try to convince you to renounce Jesus, and people are going to die in the millions, and it's, and in general, I think quite a difficult thing to kind of internalize while retaining a healthy worldview, isn't it?
Well, it's also...
I would find it difficult, at least, to go to... This is like, I guess this is quite like millennial of me, but like, I would find it quite hard to go to work, you know, in the morning if I knew that the dragon was going to be coming any day now. But I guess that's kind of like the people being like, how am I supposed to go to Starbucks when there's an oil crisis?
Yeah, I've lived through 10 wars, 2 recessions, and a pandemic, and by that they mean I saw it on the TV.
Yep.
And I think that also another thing to think about Revelation is that it's a much more upsetting description of the end of the world than the Jewish sort of quote-unquote canonical version.
Yes, and so quite early on you have people in the early church, in the church, grappling with what this actually means for them and how exactly they are supposed to treat this. And so you have these different schools of thought that come about. In particular, one of the things that is grappled with is the belief in what's described as the coming messianic age on earth, which makes its way from the Jewish eschatological tradition to the Christian one. So in Revelation, we hear about the battle between an angel and a dragon, who are presumably, you know, stand-ins for Jesus and for Satan, respectively. And we hear that the angel, quote, bound him for 1,000 years and threw him into the pit and locked and sealed it over him, so that he would deceive the nations no more until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be let out for a little while. And I saw the thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. Now he's talking about the souls of the righteous. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads, or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So we're hearing about this messianic age where the righteous live with Christ for 1,000 years, and at the end, the beast comes. So this is the origin of 2 terms which are different things, but sound quite similar. This is millenarianism and millennialism, so we'll use these intermittently. Millenarianism is the belief in general of an upcoming cataclysm that is going to change the world in a way that is apocalyptic, but will usher in something new.
And millennialism is the belief that skinny jeans look good on you.
Millennialism is the belief that you don't need kids, just a heckin' pepperino and a small doggo, and all you have to do is eat pepperino pizza with your pepperino.
Which we would never engage in that.
No, certainly not. And millennialism is the specifically Christian belief, or religious belief, rather, in an apocalypse, in sort of a biblical or a theological sense. And this is what's kind of being discussed in the first centuries of the Christian church. Where do we stand in relation to this 1,000-year period, the Messianic age? And where do we stand in general in relation, sort of even chronologically, to the events of Revelation? This is written by John as if it's something that has happened or is happening to him. So is this aspect of the text figurative? This status in relationship to time, is it something that's going to happen? And so there are, of course, differing opinions, but really from quite early on, church fathers are saying that this is all quite metaphorical, what's being described. You are not meant to take it literally. These are not literal things that are going to happen. However, these are spiritually still the terms and the stakes of the, moral and spiritual battle that your soul has to go through in order to become righteous and in order to secure eternal life after you die.
The Whore of Babylon is not a literal woman, it's your local alewife.
Yes, exactly. And even this period, a millennium, and this reference in Revelation to 1,000 years is taken to be quite figurative, and millennium is taken to mean more like era than specifically 1,000 years. And so again, quite influential early figures in the church are against this. Pope Gregory the Great specifically says that millennialism is not to be taken literally or seriously. Augustine supports it at first, but then he denies it in The City of God. He explains that actually it is all a metaphor, and also, and this is the position the church eventually settles on, basically that the millennium has already begun. So figuratively, we are living on earth with Christ, in that we have already been given Christ's presence. He's already come to us, and he's still and been born. And so basically we just have to kind of keep the ship sailing in a straight line until the unspecified date when we'll all be precipitated back up to heaven. So, yeah, it's a very abstract interpretation of Revelation. It's nevertheless, of course, agreed by the church that this is still an important narrative, and especially amongst early church fathers, many of whom believe in universal salvation and don't actually believe in a hell where a human soul can be condemned to. They still think that this is extremely important, again, for explaining the stakes to people, explaining what you're up against. And we see this belief in Revelation as a metaphor becomes especially complete when Christianity becomes more and more institutionalized and more formalized, and suddenly the Christian church is no longer an extremely marginalized organization that is constantly on the back foot and is existing in a state of crisis. Suddenly, they're the big dogs.
Well, exactly. You could say that, we're living under the... If it's 1,000 years of living in the rule of Christ, couldn't you read that as living in a Christian kingdom? Something that would have been, at that point, unthinkable in the time of John, that John is writing, and would remain unthinkable for another, couple hundred years after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Until the Ethiopians do it.
But, yeah, I think the main thing to get out of the way here is that there was never a widespread Christian belief in the Middle Ages or early or late antiquity that the events of Revelation were going to literally happen at the year 1000.
No. That all being said, the Revelation obviously is included in the canonical Bible. It's still something that you would be aware of and exposed to. It still shows up in Christian art in the early Middle Ages. But something very interesting happens to the way that Revelation is contextualized and used after the Roman Empire adopts Christianity as its official religion in the 4th century. So, Cliff Notes version, again, of late antiquity, which is that Constantine the Great in the 4th century first converts personally to Christianity, then issues a decree saying, guess what, we're all Christian now. Over the following century, the Roman Empire is very good at spreading Christianity across its territories, even to its far extremities, which is how you get Welsh people becoming Christians. To take one example. And one of the interesting things about this is that obviously, so Revelation has been read as this kind of response to Roman persecution, but the Roman Empire, once it adopts Christianity as its official religion, starts to see itself as Christ's kingdom on earth. In a, depending on how you read it, either a sort of figurative sense of we are a Christian kingdom, we must act in a Christian way, or literally, what we do is the will of God. And then, obviously, 5th century rolls around, half of the empire falls away, many of the people in the western half of the empire remain Christian, but the eastern half of the empire lives on as I reluctantly am going to have to call it for periodization purposes.
No, don't say it!
The Byzantine Empire. Let's say, I'll call it the Byzantine period of the Roman Empire.
That's good.
Is that there is still, in this kind of weird ambivalent period of the 6th, 7th centuries, there is still this question of, is the loss of the western half of the Roman Empire permanent? Certainly, the Roman emperors do not think so. There are various attempts to reconquer Italy and the lands even further west. Some of them are successful temporarily, others aren't. And there's still this idea of Rome as this sort of universal kingdom of Christ. Even though, the Christian world is more fragmented than it's ever been. And then a funny thing happens, which is that Christianity has been very happily sort of being a sort of being a messianic, world-conquering religion, very comfortable with itself. And then a new one arrives. See, from a Roman perspective, the absolute backwater of Arabia, which is that in the 7th century, the Arab conquests begin. Muhammad and his descendants sort of storm out of the Arabian desert, completely wrong foot everybody, conquer most of the most productive and richest parts of the Eastern Roman Empire, and establish Islam as a force that is just here now. You know, it's not going back in the bottle. And this is very, 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 very traumatic for the Roman Empire. I mean, Constantinople is besieged multiple times by Arab armies. There is the Arab-Byzantine wars are enormous, long, extremely bloody, and very, very, very... I was about to say whatever the opposite of one-sided is. Sort of the balance of power swings back and forth. And in that context, the salience of an apocalyptic narrative sort of starts to kind of build back up again, you might say. And we know this because there's this whole genre in the 7th and 8th and 9th centuries of Byzantine apocalyptic literature, which usually takes the form of, and the audience can't see that I'm doing this, prophecies, that was scare quotes, that are discovered, that very conveniently start by describing events in sort of recent Byzantine history, and then transition onto an sort of eschatological narrative.
It's a mouthful, man.
These are usually attributed to old discovered texts of the old church fathers. Like, damn, you know, they knew there was going to be a Roman emperor called this, and he was going to live in this year. And the reason for that is that it's all horseshit. But the most famous...
You knew that the Reds were going to win the chariot races against the Blues in the 1st century? That's crazy.
Yeah, so funnily enough, St. Methodius of Olympus did not come across a sports almanac from the year 634. What actually happened is, these are by and large very obvious frauds, but they weren't obvious at the time. The most influential of these is a text that we've already referenced before, a book called The Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius. It wasn't called that at the time because Pseudo-Methodius means not Methodius. And people thought this was a lost text by the early church father, St. Methodius of Olympus. And this is essentially an elaboration of Revelation, where Pseudo-Methodius says, yes, all the Revelation stuff is going to happen, Whore of Babylon, seven-headed dragon, etc. But before that, there will be essentially a confrontational final battle between the armies of Christendom and the sort of an unspecified heathen force. Essentially, the people who have been led astray by an Antichrist figure. And at that battle, the last Roman emperor will sally forth and drive these are definitely not Muslims into unspecified areas of Asia. And then he will reconquer Jerusalem. That's very important. Remember this. Jerusalem was present in the Jewish version, kind of disappears from from Revelation, or at least takes a back seat.
We hear in Revelation that there will be a new Jerusalem where Jesus reigns for 1,000 years. But yeah, it is not the old Jerusalem necessarily. Of course, there is that syncretism, but...
Mm-hmm. But the last Roman emperor will then reign for, I think it's 6 years in Jerusalem, And then he will, when the Antichrist arrives and the Revelation narrative starts, he will go to the hill of Golgotha where Jesus was crucified. He will lay down his earthly kind of power, and, the end of the world can begin in earnest. And so this is going to be very important for things that happen later, but I think taking it as a piece of writing about Roman politics in the early medieval period, there's a couple things I want to pick up on. Number one, the idea of the Antichrist being analogous to Muhammad and Islam, that's right there. That's an easy comparison to draw, because that's another kind of messianic figure who claims to be speaking from the voice of God. The other thing is that, of course, in true Roman fashion, the Romans have inserted themselves into the narrative. Because, again, remember, Rome is conspicuously absent. All kind of temporal political affairs are absent from Revelation. Whereas the story of the last Roman emperor is this kind of transitional phase where you still have Old Jerusalem, you still have a Roman Empire, you still have, governments, but it's all kind of leading up to the kind of, the beasts, whores, and the Messianic age.
Jesus is going to come back, and then he's going to say, it's my turn on the Xbox, and then we're going to get ice cream.
Yeah, basically, the last Roman emperor is essentially babysitting Christendom until all the exciting stuff can start. And I think that one of the things that is really, really important to emphasize is that, once again, in a moment of sort of great trauma, because, yes, I mentioned that, Jerusalem is, taking a back seat in the apocalypse narrative up to this point, but, is still the place where all that stuff happened. It's still arguably the most important city in Christendom, even if it's not a political center. Rome is, assailed on all sides. It's losing battles. There are so many different kind of cultural responses to the Arab conquest, and there's a general sense in sort of Roman Christian society that we have lost the favor of God. And as with Revelation, I think there's this sense in the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius that this is supposed to happen imminently. The enemy is quite literally at the gates. Because they're building, we can see them, they're building siege towers.
Yes, and this is part of the beauty of Revelation, is that it lends itself so well to inspiring this type of thought and this type of writing, because it is such, again, a horrifying and vivid piece of writing. I mean, really go through and read some parts from this yourself, and do read the King James Version. It's pretty shocking, and it's all of these symbols are meant not to be, again, taken literally, but to be applied by you as a Christian in the Middle Ages to your own life, and to help you interpret what you see as the signs of sin and evil in your own life. And so it's, you have all of these different figures in the Bible across the different books, like the Antichrist, who I think isn't even named as the Antichrist in Revelation, I think specifically.
No.
But you have the Antichrist, I think John, and then you have the beasts from the land and the earth. You have Satan, who is often a dragon, although there are dragons that aren't explicitly Satan. You have false prophets. And really, all of these things are sort of syncretized together in that they are all understood theologically to be emblems of the same thing. And they are all subsumed under this kind of satanic or demonic umbrella, which is to say they all stand for sin. And so it's then kind of just up to you to see what else you can throw into that big melting pot of sin. And yeah, probably it is going to be, if you see the Muslims building trebuchets outside the door of the Christian kingdom, then yes.
They didn't have trebuchets yet, goddammit.
Or whatever,
Mangonels.
Building mangonels. If you see all those... If you see a Muslim guy making kebabs outside the doors of Constantinople, and he points at the skewer and says, "You next," then you're probably going to be like, wait, is this Satan?
Yeah, and I think that this is also belies a kind of subtle shift, which is that I think that Pseudo-Methodius and writers like this are thinking about Revelation maybe not entirely literally, but not now as a stand-in for the kind of tribulations of just being a Christian and existing in the world, but now this is a sort of this is starting to mesh with politics and geopolitics. It's being recontextualized. I think at this point, since I've been kind of dancing around the relationship between the kind of spiritual apocalypse of Revelation and the kind of conceptual links between that and the traumatic Christian experience of the Arab conquests of the 7th, 8th centuries, I think it's worth asking the question of, do people literally think that this is leading up to a literal end of days?
I would have to say, in general, no. I mean, I think especially the Christian elites have a vested interest in making sure that you don't think it's the end of days, which is why that's been the line for most of the Middle Ages. Because the whole promise of the apocalypse is that it is a world in which the normal laws and the normal status quo will be suspended. And if you are at the top of that status quo, then you very much do not want to put that position in jeopardy or suggest that it might be in jeopardy.
Yeah. I think that you can definitely find throughout the Middle Ages people who are learned, people in the church who are engaging with the apocalypse as a literal thing. But with the question of, do people think the world is literally going to end? My answer to that is the same answer that we usually give when we talk about sort of fantastical supernatural things, and did people believe in dragons or whatever, which is that for most people, most of the time, it was a sufficiently distant thing that you didn't have to think about.
Well, yeah, like, we all think that, like, you know, the countries we live in and the status quo under which we live will not continue indefinitely.
Yeah.
But we do not feel it to be our job to confront that fact and reckon with what it means for our lives on a daily basis. And I think that you just have to accept that there was a blurred boundary between these religious ideas and the day-to-day realities of people's lives, and they saw them as influencing each other, but they did not see, you know, they did not necessarily kind of perceive a hard boundary between these things as being spiritual realities and being practical realities.
Yeah, because God is real.
Yeah, and your soul is very much, you know, real, and that's, you know, the most important thing is the sanctity and the salvation of your soul.
Well, let me put this a different way. I am, because I do subscribe to the scientific worldview, I am pretty confident that the world is going to end. I am equally confident that it will not happen in my lifetime, because it'll involve the expansion of the sun in billions of years.
Yes, and I think that, you know, again, the magic of the book of Revelation was that it could be applied to your own life, and it presented this highly codified guide to interpreting the end of the world. And so I think even if there was fear that people were living through what could be considered the end times, they weren't expecting the beast to literally pop out of the earth, because that wasn't what the church was telling them.
No.
And so there were times when kings and leaders and churchmen were either elevated to the status of being the divine leader who might usher in the messianic age, or castigated as, you know, the handmaidens or the fucking whatever it is, foot soldiers of the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. But again, people were not expecting to see 7 angels pop out of the heavens and blow 7 horns. They were not expecting to literally see the sky roll up like a scroll. but they were looking for ways that things that were going on in their lives could be syncretized with these symbols.
Because in the Abrahamic worldview, the world is divinely ordered, and it is a story. It is a narrative. And stories do have to have an ending, but you might not, in fact, you probably won't be alive to see it. And so we've gone through this, again, coming back to the heat death of the universe, like, that's probably true, but it's not of salience to me in my day-to-day life.
And even, Revelation accounts for this. It says, then the souls of the dead will be resurrected, and some will be judged. Or all will be judged, some will be found wanting, some will not be. So the importance of this book to your life was still understood, and the consequences of living in sin were still well understood, and still had quite a large degree of relevance to your life, even if, the beast was not going to show up tomorrow.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why, despite the fact that it's not a very practical kind of part of the Bible, because it doesn't really describe anything that you can do as a person, visual descriptions of Revelation and of the Apocalypse are everywhere in medieval texts, in frescoes, in mosaics, and in everything. A, because it's one of the most visually interesting parts of the Bible, but also because it's a good visual shorthand for fuck around, find out, you better be a good Christian, because at a certain point there will be an accounting.
Yes, and it was established and accepted quite early on in the church that the role of iconography and symbolism was extremely important for getting messages through the dense skulls of people who couldn't and frankly shouldn't read because they're dumb peasants and they don't know what's going on. And we even have a message or a paragraph. We even have a quote from one of the early church fathers, Origen, who says about the Book of Revelations that he doesn't think it's true.
Which is a wild thing to say about a canonical text.
He says, but the remarks, after explaining his position, he says, but the remarks which might be made on this topic are neither to be made to all, nor to be uttered on the present occasion. For it is not unattended with danger to commit to writing the explanation of such subjects, seeing the multitude need no further instruction than that which relates to the punishment of sinners. While to ascend beyond that is not expedient for the sake of those who are with difficulty restrained, even by fear of eternal punishment, from plunging into any degree of wickedness, and into the flood of evils which result from sin. So he's saying, obviously we don't really believe this, but we shouldn't let the broader population catch on, because then they'll just think it's a big free-for-all. It's just a big sin-all-you-can buffet. And I think this is, the fundamental, in a sense, kind of Christian almost paradox. How do you convince people to do the right thing and also that anyone can be saved? And the answer is by telling them about a bunch of really scary dragons.
Yeah.
And a really evil woman. You have to make it clear that beautiful women are evil.
I would never say that or think that.
No, I don't know about you guys, I've never met a beautiful evil woman. And I certainly wouldn't become one.
Now we're going to flash forward to the year 1000. Not much
has... the same, but there was...
Gothic architecture.
Yo!
And the Eastern Roman Empire is kind of fine, actually. So, year 1000, there was, in the 9th century, the consensus among historians was that around about the year 1000, there was a mass hysteria. The end of the world was imminent. And this is summed up by a fantastic quote by the German historian Heinrich von Seibel, who said that, as the first 1,000 years of our calendar drew to an end, in every land in Europe, the people expected with certainty the destruction of the world. Some squandered their substance in riotous living, others bestowed it for the salvation of their souls on churches and convents. Bewailing multitudes lay by day and by night about the altars. Many looked but with terror, yet most with a secret hope for the conflagration of the earth and the falling of the heavens.
Oh, I mean, me personally can't wait for that to come about.
So the consensus now is that didn't happen. You can find individual sort of quotes. People say, maybe it'll be the year 1000. I mean, that would make sense, I guess, narratively speaking.
And then after the year 1000, people saying, maybe it'll be the year 1033. I mean, wouldn't that also kind of make sense, narratively speaking? 1,000 years after the resurrection.
Yeah. If anything, more sense.
Yeah, basically, although it's not a nice round number, so I don't know.
So our oldest source that says that there was a panic about the apocalypse is the German abbot Johannes Tritimus, who says that, and I'm going to do the same voice again now.
Nice.
In this terrible year...
Sorry, can I just say...
Sorry, that's not the quote. I got it wrong.
Oh, is it? I just wanted to say, you're syncretizing Germans together the way that Christians syncretize, like, the Antichrist and Satan
That's
together.
true. I should do a different German, if I may.
No, I think it's great, because they all are satanic. Yeah, do Arnie, do Arnie.
In the deepest part of the ocean.
Yes! The beast came from the deepest part of the ocean.
Keep dancing, goddammit!
And that was what the beast said.
Drop a comment if you know what that's a reference to.
Yep.
In this year, a terrible comet appeared, by which its look terrified many, who feared that the last day was at hand, inasmuch as several years before it had been predicted by some, deluded by a false calculation, that the visible world would end in the year of Christ 1000.
When did he write this?
So, he was writing in the late 15th century.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, also, it's worse than that, because the version of there are several versions of his text. The oldest versions of that are an abridged version of the text. The actual quote that is from a manuscript dated around about 1690.
Yeah.
17th century. Famously not a time when people would have felt like, shit was getting wild. And maybe we need to kind of return to the sort of the theme of Revelation. So again, the idea of, like, there was this mass hysteria was kind of debunked in 20th century historiography. The pendulum has swung a little bit back in the time since, where people are like, well, some people were saying this. But there wasn't like this kind of like mass, everybody was going out on the streets either partying or like freaking out. It was just like there were some nerds in monasteries who were like, oh, shit, maybe we do need to worry about this. We've been kind of ignoring it for 1,000 years. But just because there wasn't mass hysteria doesn't mean the story of Revelation wasn't relevant to people in the 11th century.
Correct. Well, I'm going to put it to you. Rather than people being hysterical because they thought the apocalypse was coming, people thought the apocalypse was coming because they felt hysterical.
Makes sense.
Think
Explain.
about it like that. This is a revolutionary new idea that I read in a book from 1956. What if instead of people feeling bad because they thought the world was ending, people thought the world was ending because they felt bad? Thank you to Norman Cohn, who wrote the absolute banger book, The Pursuit of the Millennium, which is all about apocalyptic thinking in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. And I think quite rightly, Norman outlines why he thinks that the sort of non-literalist interpretations of Revelation come from the increasing power and popularity of the Christian church, but then he does note that there is a tendency whenever things get real bad again for people to think, maybe the apocalypse is happening. And it doesn't have to be a widespread thing. It's something that will affect the specific groups of people who feel like they're under threat. And so he particularly connects this to the time immediately after the year 1000, so to the 11th century, which was a time of immense turmoil for the working man, for the everyday people of the Middle Ages. So quite succinctly, he says, the areas in which the age-old prophecies about the last days took on a new revolutionary meaning and a new explosive force were the areas of rapid social change. And not simply change, but expansion. Areas where trade and industry were developing, and where the population was rapidly increasing. life in such areas differed vastly from the agricultural life, which was the norm throughout the 1,000-year span of the Middle Ages, and it is worth considering in what precisely the difference consisted. And so he is connecting it in particular to the increase of a new class of people who are not the traditional peasants nor the traditional aristocracy, because they're people who aren't tied to the land. It is the urban class, it's the vagrant class, it is the journeyman, it is the craftspeople, people who are not tied to the land and in fact live quite sort of perhaps mobile lifestyles, often in these big urban centers. Because actually, being a peasant, I mean, we know being a peasant in the Middle Ages, on the whole, it's not a great time, right?
No Doritos.
No Doritos. Even if you did have a Dorito, it would kill you immediately. And then
you know that's not the canonical opinion of this podcast.
And then your 12 children would die of dysentery, and they wouldn't even have you by your side to comfort them because you'd be dead from the Dorito. And your life was terrible and short and mean and pointless. But actually, there was an advantage to being a peasant that you might not have if you were if you lived an urban lifestyle in the Middle Ages, which is that the peasant life was shaped by custom and routine. There was a very long historical precedent for it. It was something that had been happening for centuries and would happen for centuries to come. This relationship between you, the land, the manor, the lord. And of course, you might be quite sensitive to things that would disrupt that, which was why there were occasionally peasant uprisings in the Middle Ages. But these would be things that were focused around changes to your lifestyle and essentially kind of protecting your tradition.
And a lot of the peasant revolts are quite conservative revolts. They say, like, you changed shit, put it back.
Yes, they usually have very specific demands and very specific targets, and usually it is, hey, Lord, you changed things, put it back. And this is because you actually had quite a strong network of social and familial ties as a peasant, right? Like, you've got your whole family, you know, maybe your kids grow up, but they just move to the next village over or something. And even if you have beef and you kick the shit out of the guys from the other parage at football once a month, like, when it comes down to it, if the Lord is going to try to mess with you, and I mean Lord of the Manor, not God, like, you all still have each other's backs against him. And so actually a lot of peasants had quite a bit of bargaining power. And this was just not the case if you were someone who lived in a city. You didn't own land. You probably didn't have much of a safety network there, and so you were extremely sensitive to any... imagine being someone who moved
doesn't
to the
own
big
the
city.
land that they live on.
Imagine being a disenfranchised urban scrabbler. And remember, guilds are not much of a thing before the 11th century. And often in, like, the early days of guilds, the church hated them because they hated any organization that was not Christian.
And it's not like guild membership was even open to most people who worked in an industry.
Yes, and so if you were a craftsperson, an artisan or a tradesperson, then you actually lived a very precarious lifestyle. If, like, your loom broke and you didn't have the money to fix it, you might be a beggar the next day. If your house burned down, no one was going to come help you. If you're a bargeman on the River Thames and you drop your pole in the river, well, you're up the creek without a paddle. And something pretty big happened, especially starting in the 11th century, which was urbanization. So cities absolutely exploded in population starting in the 11th century. And if you look at the population estimates for most cities in Europe, especially Central Europe before 1000 AD, most of them are remarkably stable and also very small. So we know that cities in Europe from this time period were very small compared to literally any other continent in the world, basically. Like, smaller than cities in modern-day Mexico.
Oh, yeah, it's literally, like, Europe and then modern day US and Canada. I can't even say North America because North America had massive cities as well.
Yeah, exactly. And they're smaller than cities from ancient Rome even. So.
Oh yeah, fucking Syracuse used to be like 300,000 people.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, like for instance from, the 7th to like the 11th century, Paris basically doesn't change in population.
Mm-hmm.
Then between 1000 and 1200 AD, it increases 5 times in size. So I believe it triples between 1000 and 1100.
Wow.
It goes from about 20,000 to about 60,000 people. And then it goes to beyond 100,000 by 1200. Similarly, Ghent and Bruges, probably around double in size in the 11th century. And this isn't just people having more babies. A lot of this is people from the countryside moving into the cities. So the population of Europe is growing overall, but the cities are growing much faster than the countryside because people are leaving behind their families. They're saying, bye, mom and dad. I'm going to move to Paris. You're probably never going to see me again. So they're going out into the cities to basically, for the same reason that people do now, which is a perceived potential for increase in the opportunities that they can have to make money. We, of course, have already talked about the Holy Roman Empire building stability in Europe, so there are increased opportunities for trade. There is increased demand for an artisanal class, for an artisan class, not artisanal class. That makes it sound like they're importing, like, whole grain fucking...
whole grain sourdough.
Ancient seed sourdough people into the city. But you know what is the sad thing about moving to the big city?
It's fucking scary and it's hard.
And not everyone can make it.
And sometimes you feel like this place hates you.
Yeah, exactly.
and it's out to get you specifically.
Yeah, you're queuing for, 6 hours to get into Ye Olde Berghain behind some, mean hot girls wearing, like, brand new stockings. And they don't let you in, and you have to walk, 3 hours home because you keep trying to hail, a cart, and no one will stop to pick you up.
Or how about you have to move 5 times in 4 years?
Yeah.
Because you don't own your own home.
No, exactly.
And you start to go insane.
I mean, there's so many great medieval, poems and works about, how much the city sucked. This is one of those things, how scary medieval taverns were that is, not overstated at all in popular culture. Yeah. I mean,
everybody's got a fucking knife.
Did I read you... I forget if I read this for the podcast or for my book, but did I read you the thing about going to London and getting your clothing stolen and then seeing it for sale in the flea market and not having enough money to buy it
back? But you know what that is? Fucking London phone thieves.
It's the phone thing and the bike thing. No, it's a tale as old as time. Truly. So anyways, living in... Shout out city livers. We do it because we want to, not because we have to. And so
I'm just reminded of there's a great quote. I'm gonna steal this. This is not a medieval quote. This is a quote from an episode of the podcast The Worst Idea of All Time. And they're talking about reviewing the movie Joker 2 14 times in 5 days. But it also sums up how I feel about living in London. I'm not going to do a New Zealand accent, don't worry. Okay, here are a few immutable facts. You have agency. It doesn't feel like I have agency now. I'm technically here at the behest of myself, but it doesn't feel like that. And that is what moving to the big city feels like at all times.
It sucks, and it probably sucks even more if you have to see some bishop going around every day in his big fancy cloak that's, covered in jewels, and all of the rich guys getting rich, and, moving to the city, again, as it does now, it did back then, mean that you were giving up these ancient social and familial ties that were holding your life together in the first place up until that point. I mean, we've talked extensively on this podcast about, the Anglo-Saxon social networks and social ties. And, of course, those weren't necessarily formalized in law throughout all of the 11th century, but they were still very much an important part of everyone's lives. So, yeah, you might move to the city and find yourself actually feeling much worse off than when you're living in the countryside. Not everyone can make it, just sort of numerically, mathematically. If a few people are profiting, someone's going to be coming out not that well.
And this is what Inside Llewellyn Davis is about. You've not seen that movie, have you? It's about this.
But the thing is about the big city is that it forces you to confront, I think, in a much more real and regular, frequent sense, the unfairness of it all.
Yes.
And it puts you into contact as well with other people who are of your kind, such as you and I, how we found each other, I mean. It brings you
because a lovely Italian woman told you to be friends with me, and then you were.
No, it was because of our shared nihilism and a sense of impending doom. Remember?
Well, it was both of those.
Remember,
things.
I met you at the Street Preachers. We were talking about how the world was going to end.
That's true. Yeah. The Street Preacher, is that a Weatherspoons? I can't remember if we've been to that one.
Yeah, I remember I chundered in the corner. Remember, I started saying all those things about how the beast was upon me and to beware the whore of Babylon. Sorry, just kidding. That's every time we go to Spoons.
Anyway, we're getting off topic.
Not as off topic as last time when we talked about Gothic movement for like an hour.
Oh yeah, by the way, fun, just to reiterate that, the version of that episode that went out has about 10 goth jokes removed surgically.
Yep. So it's also very easy, as a Christian, to turn this symbolic language of evil and of the apocalypse, not just on people who are not Christian, but on Christians who you think are not living Christian lives. And so there were a series of popular movements that sprung up in the 11th century that were basically disenfranchised urban craftsmen and women and other marginalized urbanized people like beggars and vagrants and vagabonds and rascals and roustabouts and rakes and all of those people basically just saying, hey, what the hell, man?
This isn't the Christian kingdom I was promised.
Yes. And again, this is mostly after the year 1000, but of course tensions leading up to the year 1000 have sort of preceded this, but
We've talked about how difficult the 10th century just was in general.
Yes. I mean, there was often a sort of messianic element to these cults, so it was often a guy being like, I can save you. One of my favorite examples is a guy named Tonkelm from the Low Countries. He was a preacher who proclaimed himself to possess the Holy Spirit in his body in his equal measure as Christ himself. And he amassed a huge league of followers who were apparently extremely violent. They killed a lot of people, but this involved surrounding himself with an inner cadre of 12 men meant to sort of symbolize or stand in
I wonder
for the
what
12
that's
apostles.
referencing.
And one woman who was the Virgin Mary and, probably had a real tough time of that job.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah. No, it got really freaky, actually. Apparently, because he was like, his whole thing was like, oh, I have the Holy Spirit in me. Apparently he would distribute, like, vials of his own bathwater to his followers as, like, relics. And apparently they would drink them in, like, a kind of fake Eucharist.
Nothing like that would ever happen today.
Certainly not. So, yeah, street preacher bathwater. Get yours.
Only friars.
Shh. So that was just one example. I really just wanted to mention the bathwater, to be honest. But it's a good example. And he eventually got shut down, but there were loads of others like him. And over the course of the 11th century, these instances of people looking for a form of salvation that they could cling onto grew and materialized into something that was much, much more real and much more mortal, and actually took the doctrine of revelation quite seriously. And that is...
Crusading?
First Crusade.
First thing that I would say is that we need to remember that who are the people who try and go on crusade to the Holy Land first, before the knights and the great lords?
Famously, like 1 bazillion peasants.
Yes. And they get immediately killed.
And they're not even asked by the Pope to go, which is one of the really big tragedies of it. Because there is this movement to, preach and encourage peasants to go crusading. And none of this is really officially endorsed by the Pope. It is peasants preaching to other peasants that they have to go to the Holy Land. And we see this, pop cultural element in the late 11th century of the righteousness of going and violently engaging in this battle against evil that is quite literally a life and death battle, but we can very much see where this impetus comes from both the tensions of having this disenfranchised, beleaguered group of people, and from the righteousness and the doctrine of righteousness and of a righteous struggle. So, the Song of Roland, for instance, do you know what it's about? Who does Roland fight? A bunch of...
It's Saracens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, even though there is technically this Christian doctrine of conversion and Jesus never preached going to stab a bunch of people, this is what works its way into the popular Christian culture. So, in the Song of Roland, we have a part that says, "The emperor has taken Saragossa. 1,000 Franks are sent to search thoroughly through the town, the mosques and synagogues. With iron hammers and axes they smash the images and all the idols. Henceforth there will be no place there for spells or sorceries. The king believes in God. He desires to serve him. His bishops bless the water, and the heathens are brought to the baptistry. If any one of them resists Charlemagne, the king has him hanged or burnt to death or slain with the sword."
And I want to take us back half an hour to remind everybody that we can trace this to this idea of kind of messianic apocalypticism being kind of equated with warfare and with a sort of confrontation of, Christians fighting non-Christians for Jerusalem, which goes back to Pseudo-Methodius and all of the Byzantine apocalyptic literature.
Yeah. And so, again, because the Bible and traditional biblical interpretation not only allows but encourages this degree of syncretism between all of these different elements, your own life and the biblical lives. There's, evil everywhere. It was all too easy for people to see the fight against Muslims and the fight against Jews to reclaim the Holy Land as being justified by the logic that was set out in Revelation. It was easy for peasants to see themselves as the people who were potentially bringing in a new era of paradise, a new Jerusalem, if you will. And so they went to the Holy Land and they were massacred by the hundreds and thousands.
But not before they massively inconvenienced several kingdoms along the way.
Yeah, and they massacred Muslims and Jews by the hundreds and thousands. There were still some of them around when they sieged Jerusalem, and they, I think, basically killed every single person in the city.
Yes. There's lots of very horrifying descriptions of people sort of wading through blood, which might be, are almost certainly poetic license, but are poetic license to convey the sheer horror of the level of violence.
Yeah.
A level of violence that doesn't it remind you a little bit of the scenes of Revelation?
Yeah.
That maybe, despite the fact that Jesus preached, peace to all men and, render unto Caesar and things of that nature, that Jesus was about something very, very different. Suddenly, violence and confrontation and struggle can be more spiritually significant than conversion and faith.
Especially when you're living a life where you don't see a way out, then really death does become a fantasy, especially if it can be a righteous death. And the end of the world can be a fantasy if it is ended in a way that's righteous, and you know that paradise is waiting for you on the other side.
And if you're noticing a hint of Dr. Strangelove in all of this...
How to stop worrying and learn to love the Crusades.
Yes, I think that there is a real, that is a valid and useful comparison.
And so, in a strange and counterintuitive way, it may seem, the apocalypse is a fantasy. Mm-hmm. And it's a form of catharsis.
Yes.
It's everything being set straight. It is everything being put in order. It is an end to the rules that govern our current worlds. The worldly rules that keep things in their current state. And in many ways, it is an ushering in of an era governed by righteousness. And I think we see this. I mean, I think when thinking about it, nowadays, I have to think that the era and the fixation on these apocalyptic stories really has not left us at all. Because,
my God, no.
I mean, it was especially big when I was like 13, but like all the zombie apocalypse stories, do you remember? I mean...
Let's get into it. Let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember like in like a 5-year period, we got like World War Z, sorry, you're probably supposed to say World War Z here. Is it a British book?
I know it was filmed in Glasgow.
Oh, it was filmed in Glasgow,
Yeah.
was it? Nay, I didn't know that.
Don't do the voice.
I did make Ken.
Don't. You're too good for that.
Warm Bodies.
Underrated early Nicholas Hoult movie.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's will always be the thing that I know him from, so yeah.
They didn't have skins in Berlin.
That is true. And probably some oh my god, what was the one that was like it was like Kick-Ass but with zombies. It was like the two dudes and there's like a hot girl.
I know what you mean. Well, I mean, okay, well, while we're trying to figure that one out.
Zombieland.
Good movie. Bill Murray is in it.
Wait, he is? Oh my god.
He's like very conspicuously in it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Or Shaun of the Dead. I mean, actually, let's do a close reading of Shaun of the Dead.
There might be a zombie apocalypse, but you'll finally get to hang out with your buddy.
Well, exactly. It's like I don't have to like my Peter Serafinowicz is my boss or my roommate, and he sucks. My relationship is not going well.
Oh my god, I forgot that's Peter Serafinowicz.
Yes, he's in that.
Fuck.
Brian Butterfield himself.
Oh my god.
But when the
blood.
brains.
Pints of blood. Grandma Butterfield's Christmas blood.
But like Shaun of the Dead is literally about a guy whose life kind of sucks and is like, finally, me and my idiot friend will get to like, we'll be rewarded for being idiots. We'll go to the pub. And we'll all live happily ever after. And then of course it does, and it is ultimately a movie about the fact that modernity kind of living in London sucks. And it's really frustrating, and wouldn't it be nice if we could just make that all go away?
I mean, I told you about how I accidentally caused the coronavirus pandemic, right?
No.
Well, it was like February of 2020, and I was at a debating dinner at the GUU, as I was often wont to do, and I was sitting next to this guy, and he said, oh, it would be funny if this whole COVID thing turned out to be like a really big deal, and it was a proper pandemic.
Oh, God.
But it probably won't happen. And I said, yeah, but wouldn't it kind of be cool if it did? Because then we could really say we lived through something.
And how do you feel about that now? Was it cool? Did you enjoy it?
I mean, I got to smoke a lot of weed and play a lot of Jackbox. So yeah, I did actually. But I recognize that was not the median experience. It definitely made the world worse off than it was before. Definitely kind of stomped on the decline, on the gas pedal of decline. So yeah, but it was like, looking back, and I think I've told this story to people, and they're like, how could you say something like that? That was horrible. But I don't believe that people don't understand it, because I think everyone understands the feeling of wanting to live through something, right?
Yes. Well, here's another example. I'm assuming that most people who are listening to this know the famous Tumblr post about the mineral.
They crave that mineral?
No, not that they crave that mineral, but the being deficient in the mineral.
Oh, yeah.
My brain is expanding at like a rate of 5 millimeters a second right now. Yes, so this is a famous Tumblr post by CordeliaFlight.tumblr.com. My deepest, darkest fantasy is that I collapse on the street and am rushed to the hospital. They perform a bunch of tests and find out I'm severely deficient in some kind of vitamin. I guess it's the vitamin, not the mineral. I'm a dumbass. Then I start taking the vitamin and I become the happiest, cleverest person alive because all my problems were caused by this one deficiency. And then Cara Calliope follows up. Moreover, everyone gathers around to be tremendously compassionate and discreetly admiring. All this time, you lacked the vitamin, and yet you persevered. And the fantasy of the vitamin is about validating the fact that you find life fucking hard and difficult. And maybe, maybe if you can elevate the tribulations of, like, living through emergent modernity as this is actually not just me finding it fucking hard, it's hard on a cosmic scale. That's very validating. Of course it would be an appealing message.
Yes, because it's radicalization in a sense, and I think in order to be radicalized, you have to feel like there is nothing going for you in your life. You have to feel like you have nothing to lose, which a lot of these people felt, and then you have to be cut off from society or from your family or from people who can support you and who can intervene. And so it is, I think, fundamentally, it is an ideology that can only come from someone who feels that they are in exile, either literally or spiritually, because it's about not fitting in and then finally finding the one thing, the one crazy preacher or the one bloody siege that you can take part in that will mean that you were part of the right thing and that you were on the right side of something and that it all meant something. All of that struggle was leading up to something.
Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm very different from medieval people. Massive social dislocation and political crisis would never lead to millenarianism in a sort of modern or secular context, except it fucking did. I mean, of course, well, let's start with the First Great Awakening. 18th century, what's happening in the world in the 18th century?
Industrialization
is finally kicking off. The colonization of the Americas is in full swing. Two of the most massively dislocating things that have ever happened in human history.
Yeah, Neapolitan ice cream.
And
Napoleon Bonaparte.
Well, revolutionary politics is sweeping Europe. And
French Revolution.
Yes, and is starting to emerge in the New World as well, very, very embryonically. Old certainties are being swept away. It's incredibly destabilizing. And so where do people go?
To church.
They go to weird new churches.
Puritan churches.
The Puritans. The
Episcopalians.
Methodists. The Methodists. The Unitarians. The Quakers. The Shakers. I mean, God, the Shakers are the perfect example because they literally said everybody needs to stop fucking because the world is about to end. So there's no point, and also it's sinful. By the way, kids, go see The Testament of Anne Lee in cinemas now in the UK. It's really, really good. Any comparisons with the effect of urbanization on sort of how people understood themselves and their place in the universe? I don't think so. And then, of course, let's fast forward to the 19th century. And this is where I'm either going to get unbelievably canceled on Twitter or everybody's going to agree with how smart I am. Because 19th century industrialism is here. It's not just in its sort of core areas of like England and Germany and the Low Countries anymore. It is properly everywhere in Europe. And what do we see in the 19th century? What is the most important ideology which emerges from the 19th century?
Communism.
The most millenarian ideology ever constructed. What I am sorry to the communist listeners, what I'm about to say is heresy, but it is true. Communism is perhaps the most millenarian ideology ever constructed.
Wait, that's so big brain, but no, you're right. Because millenarianism doesn't mean that it's an evil ideology. It just means that it all has to end so we can start again.
The idea, what Marx and Marxist communism outlines is we have had the stages of history. This will culminate in a confrontation, and then there will be a transitional period where we will be governed by secular Jesus, aka communists. And then we will live forever after in the New Jerusalem of socialism. And by the way, Christian socialists have throughout history have explicitly made that argument.
Yeah, damn. That's crazy. Wow. I didn't make that connection, but you're so right.
And you could also say that fascism is extremely millenarian. It's because, it's also a response to extreme social dislocation.
Everybody wants to end the world. Because
ending the world feels, as you said, it's cathartic.
It's easier to throw it all out than to change it. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that to return briefly to the world of apocalyptic fiction, I think one of the things that's very interesting is the apocalyptic fiction that we engage with, not just zombie apocalypse, but apocalypses in general, are fundamentally very rarely stories about things ending. They are usually stories about change. I mean, take, for example, canonical text on this show, Canticle for Leibowitz, which is an extremely medievalist coded book about the world ends in nuclear fire. We end up inventing the Middle Ages again. And not to spoil the ending of that book, but the ending of the book, which is very, very, very pessimistic and does end in a sort of an apocalyptic state. The last image of that book is one of transformation.
Yeah.
That an apocalypse, and that's why Ragnarok is such an interesting comparison to Revelation, because Ragnarok is written by it's the stories of the Old Norse mediated through Christianity, and so you do have the cyclical nature of the universe, the chess pieces on the board outside of the ruins of Valhalla. But you also have, in order to get there, you have the trials and tribulations of an apocalypse.
Well, yes, and whether you believe in a New Jerusalem that will go on forever, or simply a cycle of destruction and rebirth, it's all about believing that there is a point to the chaos, and that there is a place for you in the chaos, in a big, scary, chaotic world that seems like it wants you dead.
And I think the reason why it's that comparison is so resonant to people even now is that what unifies the Abrahamic faith is because, by the way, we haven't really talked about this, but Islamic eschatology has pretty much all the same beats.
Yep.
It's a little bit less scary than Revelation, but Jesus is there.
Yep.
The Mahdi is there.
Yep.
It's very, very similar to the Judeo-Christian kind of narrative. I started this episode by talking about like the Abrahamic faith's idea of the apocalypse is very, very, very particular and is kind of unique. And I think it reflects the fact that the Abrahamic faiths are a uniquely human-centric ideology, basically, where you compare them to what came before, where it's just like a bunch of gods who are, committing terrible acts of violence and sex crimes, essentially, and don't really care about people, to a variations on a god whose entire kind of focus is on humanity.
Yeah, he built the world for you. We're like in this little zoo enclosure he made just for us.
Yeah, and there's a real, the reason why I think Christian art, medieval Christian art, uses the apocalypse as a kind of resonant reminder to, tell people to, I swear to God, you better act right, you're getting this shoe, is that the entire apocalypse narrative is also a macrocosm of your own soul. And it is about the apocalypse has always been, from the very, very beginning, has been about the human condition.
Beautiful. Oh, amazing. Wow.
How fucking smart did you feel? As soon as I clocked that, I was like, fuck.
Fox the tea. All right. Can we wrap
Maybe
up?
Tom Holland is right. Fuck.
Goddamn. All right. Let's do it.
Alright, it's me, Tom Holland.
It's me. Did you see that he and Dominic Sandbrook were
Kissed.
like... No, I didn't see that. That sounds hot. Ooh, ooh, Dominic. Dominate me.
That is not getting on the show.
On gentle Doran, we strike for a throne. Honoring Michael, who can read?
Well, we have, just as the world will come to its end in Revelation, we have come to the end of this podcast. Now I have to hurry up because I gotta go fight a big dragon and a big fish. What are you doing in the apocalypse?
I'm kicking it with the whore. In fact, I've been called a whore of Babylon before. No, just kidding. But seriously, when you see me popping out of the ocean, like, you'll know it's all kicking off.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, please do leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And maybe if you leave a Spotify comment, Olivia might read it out on the podcast.
Yes! Thank you to, Caladria and Griffin, who said, I think you may have confused Glupshido with Blorbo.
This is a discussion we had at the time.
But this is important because they are right. If it's the dude you're obsessed with, that's your Blorbo. My weird medieval Blorbo is Edward, 2nd Duke of York. Love his dog book. They are right, though. They are right. Glubshido is the guy that you derisively say that people, care about but shouldn't. Or is your personal Blorbo.
Who's your personal Blorbo?
I mean, it's Christine de Pizan.
That's true. That's true.
Obviously.
My Blorbo is every single one of the middle-aged men from Red Letter Media.
And let's see, I also really liked the mixed reactions to your statements on Hamburg. Because there were like 2 or 3 people that were like, how could you insult Hamburg?
And then somebody was like, fucking finally.
Someone said, thanks to Duncan, who said, 5 stars, Hamburg gave me epilepsy, and I'm glad to hear it being taken down a peg.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
If you experienced Hamburg, you may be entitled to medical compensation.
They have a great museum of like little miniatures.
And I also, last one, really appreciated Grapefruit Street, who said, that is so Prester John to peace out just before he's scheduled to show up. Referencing the Marco Polo Netflix series in which they never made the Prester John series, which was really funny because that's true.
Yeah.
The series was like, Prester John is showing up, and then he never did.
Do you think that was a meta commentary?
Yeah, I do. And with that, we are going to leave you to enjoy your day. Try not to think of the beast. Try not to listen to the beast. If you see the beast, turn the other way and walk in the opposite direction. Likewise, if you see either of us, do the same.
Mm-hmm. And I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. One of the 4 beasts saying, bah! And I saw, and behold, a white horse. And the name that rode upon him was John. And Chinese food followed with him.